Jedi Squadron is a podcast run by the Anime Secrets website. Check us out at animesecrets.org for more anime, video game, tokusatsu, and now Star Wars content. Remember to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts today.
Hello, new Padawans, and welcome to the Jedi Squadron podcast. Here, you will be taking lessons in the many pieces of the Star Wars universe, whether it be the movies, animated series, video games, comics, and etc. This is your training into becoming a Star Wars fan as part of the Jedi Squadron. May your training go well, and may the Force be with you, young Padawans.
What is going on, guys, and welcome to the Jedi Squadron podcast presented by animesecrets.org. I am your host, Nathan Desa, and today, once again, we are taking a look at a novel in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, but this time, instead of taking a look into Legends, we are going to be taking a look at the Star Wars new canon for the first time, fittingly enough, we are actually going to start off our novel series in the new canon by taking a look at the very first book that was released as part of it, A New Dawn. A New Dawn was written by John Jackson Miller and first published in September of 2014. John Jackson Miller, by this point, was a veteran Star Wars writer. He had done a couple of comic books, that were part of the Knights of the Old Republic series. He actually wrote a book that is still considered part of a Legends called Kenobi, which is a book about Obi-Wan's life on Tatooine. But in this case, the book that he has written as part of A New Canon, A New Dawn, it is actually a prequel to the Star Wars Rebel series, which gives us the origin story behind our two main characters of the show. Well, two of the main characters, Kanan Jarrus and Hera Syndulla. This book was actually released almost a month before the premiere of Rebels. Does this book do a good job at introducing the then upcoming show? Well, let's find out. Now, a bit of a disclaimer here before I jump in. Unlike my Legends books, where I tend to give a little bit more spoilers, in the case of my new canon book reviews, I'm actually going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, simply because I really want to encourage a lot of people to take a look at the new canon material and, the novels. So unlike before in my Splinter of the Mind's Eye review, where I basically told the entire plot and everything, whenever I do a new canon book, I am going to give the basic premises of the plot and some of the things that I like. Maybe there'll be some minor spoilers, but I want to keep them to a minimum. So I'll probably get a little bit out of hand with the spoilers on Legends, but I am strictly trying to keep spoilers to a minimum with the new canon. So with that being said, let us begin. A New Dawn takes place roughly 6 years before the start of the Rebel series, and like I said, it revolves around our main characters, Kanan Jarrus and Hera Syndulla. We are introduced to our character, Caleb Doom, who, as if you have seen Rebels, you'll know that is the actual name of Kanan before he actually changed his name. Kanan is a former Jedi Padawan who survived the Great Jedi Purge of Order 66, and he has assumed his new identity, Kanan Jarrus. He's living his life, taking different jobs to get by, but unfortunately, while he's working for a mining operation on the planet Gorse, he runs into trouble when Count Vidian, a top assistant to the Emperor, arrives to inspect the mining. In the midst of this inspection, Kanan meets up with a mysterious Twi'lek woman named Hera Syndulla, who is working for another mysterious person who is actually never named in this novel, trying to recruit people to her cause, and the two eventually discover a plan from Vidian to blow up the entire planet of Gorse. With the help of a somewhat crazy demolitions expert named Skelly and a Celestin slicer named Zaluna, Kanan and Hera team up to stop Vidian, while Kanan contemplates over whether or not he actually wants to join Hera's cause. Now, I do want to give a disclaimer here before I start talking about in depth of my feelings toward this novel. So when I originally read this book, I had not seen Rebels. I was still watching the Clone Wars series with the intention of watching Rebels after I finished. But when I had read this book, I had not started watching Rebels at all. Now, as of the recording of this podcast, I have not seen it all the way through. I have seen it midway through season 2. So I don't know. I'm not really quite sure if there's any Easter eggs that are later, laid out in this novel that appear in the show. I do know that we're not introduced, at least as far as I remember, we are not introduced to any of the other characters. Like we don't see Zeb, we don't see Sabine, and we definitely don't see Ezra, since Ezra literally gets introduced to our main characters in the first episode of Rebels. But so this is strictly a Kanan and Hera story. But I do want to say, to kind of spoil what I'm going to be saying at the end of this podcast, I really enjoyed reading this book. It didn't wow me as much as some of the other Star Wars novels that I've read, but I was very intrigued by both Kanan and Hera enough to where I did want to check out Rebels after I finished reading this book. So to kind of answer my question that I just said at the beginning of this podcast, does this book do a good job at kind of getting people hyped up for Rebels? In my opinion, it does, very much. The story is admittedly a little complicated and hard to follow, but our two main characters, Kanan and Hera, are the things that really stood out to me. Kanan, well, first of all, he's my favorite character in Rebels. I really like Kanan as a character. And this book, and maybe I'm going off a lot of how I was introduced to Kanan in this book and not so much in Rebels, but just knowing the kind of person he is in this book and seeing how he is in Rebels actually really makes me like him as a character. I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of what happens to him in Rebels. We're given a lot of his backstory in this book. There's actually a prelude. There's a short little prelude in this book where we are showing him as a young Jedi, a youngling being trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. And, throughout the book, there's a lot of, flashbacks of him when he was taken up as a Padawan by Depa Billaba, which, that's not really a spoiler since, you see that in Rebels. And, we even see that at the beginning of Bad Batch, too, which, that's another cool thing that I love about this book. Like, the scene where we get to see Depa Billaba and Caleb Doom get turned on by the clones in Order 66 in the premiere of Bad Batch. That was actually kind of cool in the Bad Batch episode, but I'll talk more about that later when Riz and I decide that we want to review the Bad Batch. But moving on to talk about with Kanan, we're constantly shown flashbacks, him witnessing her being killed. And what I love about him with this character is that, he's just a guy going wherever he ends up. He takes whatever job he can get. He's actually kind of a womanizer. He likes to hit up the bars sometime and, hit on the ladies every once in a while, which actually kind of leads to a sort of kind-of-ish romance thing going on with Hera. It's not really, they don't go all the way, of course, but, it's still pretty cool. And I like that, and what I love about him is that, every now and then he'll tap into his powers with the Force if it helps him with his job, but at this point in his life, he's actually more or less kind of tried to reject the Force, and I think this book does an amazing job at really, establishing why Kanan is so bitter about the Force. I mean, think about it. He's been constantly, like when he was a kid, he was constantly taught about the will of the Force and everything great about it, and yet, despite, everything that he's been taught about the Force, he's lost all his friends. He lost the Jedi Master that was like a mother to him, and clearly the will of the Force wasn't on his side then. And yeah, you could say that that's a little predictable of a story, but I'll be honest, I've never seen a Jedi survivor really go that route, and we've seen this with so many other characters. We just saw it with Obi-Wan, where he's more of a broken man who's just given up on everything. Ahsoka's going around trying to live, but, she doesn't really appear to be completely traumatized. we have Cal Kestis, who's just laying low and just trying to, be himself. But in the case of Kanan, he's just kind of become a straight up like guy who just doesn't care and, likes to hit up the bars and drink and hit on women. And honestly, I really dig that. I dig that. And that's one of the reasons why I really love Kanan. I love that direction that they take him. And yeah, there's really nothing more that I can complain about with Kanan. And we, of course, see him, slowly regain his, of course, and this shouldn't be much of a spoiler if you've seen Rebels, because, we, of course, know in Rebels that he's going to, regain his fighting spirit and everything. But I think that the book does a really good job at really, slowly bringing him to that. I think the pacing with Kanan's character is great. And, to kind of move on to the next character, we have Hera. Hera is a pretty cool character. She's another character that I really looked forward to seeing in the Rebel series. When we first meet her, she's going around Gorse. She's traveling around the galaxy in search of people that have grievances against the Empire, trying to recruit them to a slowly, growing rebellion. We don't really see much to expand on that for Hera, but, it does seem like it's been expanded upon good enough in Rebels, at least with what I've seen so far. What's actually kind of an interesting thing for me is that before I read A New Dawn, the Star Wars book that I read before this was Lords of the Sith, which that's going to be another novel that I'm going to be taking a look at. But the main character in Lords of the Sith is Cham Syndulla, who is her father. And, I don't, Cham Syndulla is actually her, her father. And, we've seen her in, we've actually seen that character in Clone Wars, I believe. He's not a major character in Clone Wars, but there's like a handful of episodes that take place on Ryloth where there's like freedom fighters on Ryloth, and that's her father, Cham Syndulla. And we're expanded upon that story. Like that's the biggest story in Lords of the Sith. So it really does, it's by reading that book before I read this one, I really don't have to, it really, gives so much explanation on why Hera is like this and why she has so many ambitions. She's a very entertaining character. She likes to use her natural charm and good looks to get what she wants, but she can hold her own in a fight. And as many people can see in Rebels, she's a simple, caring person. She's kind of like the mom to the rest of the group. And I really like that. Hera is another one of my favorite characters from Rebels, and I really liked how I was introduced to her here. So I can't really complain about that. Unfortunately, though, the other characters I can't exactly say that are as amazing. They're kind of hit and miss. We have a character named Okadiah who's like a father figure for Kanan. He serves that role okay. We have Boss Lal and her husband Gord, who are pretty fine characters, I guess. And, they're characters that Kanan's developed a connection with on Gorse, and, they're fine. But then our two other big characters, Skelly and Zaluna, I've heard some people say that they like these characters, but I honestly don't. Like, they're both boring in my opinion. There's not really much memorable about them. Like, Skelly is just this crazy older guy who just knows a lot about bombs, and Zaluna is just a security hacker. There's really nothing special about him. And unfortunately, the main villain, Count Vidian, is another boring villain. He's this cyborg human, like hybrid type of guy. And honestly, the only thing that I can really remember about him is like the way that they describe him and like some of the fan art that they have. He seems like a ripoff of Darth Malak from Knights of the Old Republic, except he's not really that scary or intimidating. He's just this evil guy for the sake of being evil, and they try to build upon him as being this big, frightening, and menacing villain. But the funny thing is that he's defeated pretty handedly by our heroes, and the cybernetics that he has within him show that he actually has a lot more weaknesses that are easy to exploit. he's just a guy who wants to do good for the Empire, and he's willing to do anything to accomplish that goal. And we've seen that villain before, and there's really nothing new that's done with him. There is another book that's introduced, another villain that's introduced in this book, I'm sorry. Her name is Rae Sloane. She is the captain of the Star Destroyer Ultimatum that assists Vidian in this mission. Rae Sloane doesn't do much in this book, but she is actually expanded upon. She is actually a main character in the Aftermath trilogy, which is another book trilogy that I'm going to be taking a look at the Jedi Squadron podcast at some point. She's this young captain who wants to prove herself to the Emperor since she's only a temporary commanding officer. She develops a connection with Vidian. It's cool to see her here. I had actually read this book after I read Aftermath, so I don't know. It's just cool establishing her. Thankfully, she does get a bit more development in the Aftermath trilogy, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Now, another thing I want to talk about, this is going to be a regular thing that I take a look at in canon books, is that I want to do another thing where I'm going to be bringing up a couple of Easter eggs that, and connections to other Star Wars media that are scattered throughout this book. So here's a few that I spotted. So for starters, we have a quote at the behind the book that in which Emperor Palpatine says, quote unquote, "The war is over. The Separatists have been defeated and the Jedi Rebellion has been foiled. We stand on the threshold of a new beginning," unquote. Now, this quote was not made in the actual Revenge of the Sith, but it was apparently part of the big speech that Palpatine makes in the movie, but it got cut out. But funnily enough, it did actually make an appearance in the comic book adaptation of the movie. A big thing about this book is that since it's the first novel of the new canon, it has the burden of establishing a lot of regular terms and ideas from legends that are used in actual canon. So one of the big things is that in the original legends, they would call coffee calf. And, calf is also used in this book, and they use a lot of terminologies for geographical locations as well. So this does establish that a lot of the basic terms in the Legends continuity are basically still apply to the new canon. In the page following the prologue, there is a text readout of a message sent to Jedi throughout the galaxy to stay away from the temple. The message is, quote unquote, "This is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Republic forces have been turned against the Jedi. Avoid Coruscant. Avoid detection. Stay strong, and may the Force be with you," unquote. Now, as you may know, that is very different from the message that we actually see Obi-Wan speak in the actual Rebels show. But there's apparently been an explanation for why this is different. The message that Obi-Wan sent had many different forms, and the version that we are shown in the text is apparently just a simplified text version of the same message. There is a metal known as thorolide that appears in this novel. It is a major resource that is being mined on the planet, since, as you may recall, Kanan's working in a mine, and the mine is rich in thorolide, which is a metal. And this metal apparently appeared previously in a Knights of the Old Republic comic. I've never read it, but apparently it did appear in a Legends continuity Knights of the Old Republic comic. And funnily enough, that comic was actually also written by John Jackson Miller. So yeah, John, nice job at canonizing your own material there. And that's about it. Those are the only Easter eggs that I could really find. But if you guys have read this book and know any other Easter eggs, and you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment down below. Any Easter eggs that you may have spotted. But to get into my overall thoughts of A New Dawn, it is a solid book and serves as a decent start to the Star Wars new canon in this, new Del Rey era. Del Rey is the publishing company that's, for all these books. It's got a lot of good action. They set up our two main characters perfectly. And Admittedly, there are some anticlimactic points in the book. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I can't be too disappointed with that because, I feel like these points are going to be tied up in the actual Rebels show, and that's something I can appreciate, that the show doesn't go too far because, they want to save a lot of the good stuff for when Rebels actually hits the show. Is it an amazing book? No, and I don't think I would ever read it again, until maybe when I finish Rebels and I just decide that I want to read this book again just because I love these characters. But at the very least, I can say that this book did intrigue me enough to want to watch Rebels even more than I already did before I read it. So it did definitely do something right. I'm going to give this book an overall grade of a B-. And if you are a Rebels fan, I definitely recommend checking it out because it gives a lot more depth to both Kanan and Hera. So go ahead and check it out. That about wraps up this podcast. I will be returning to the Star Wars New Canon with another novel review next time on the Jedi Squadron. I thank you guys so much for checking me out. Be sure to, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and also leave any comments down below with any novels you would like for me to review. And if I've read them, I will review it immediately. And if not, well, then I'll get on it as fast as I can. With that said, I also want to thank everyone who listens to us on iTunes and Spotify. We love each and every one of you that take the time to listen to us, because without you guys, we would not be able to do this. I will see you guys next time when I return to the Star Wars in the novel form. But until that time, you guys stay safe. May the Force be with you, and we love you.